Millionaire CEO saves girl who fell into ice hole. Then what she whispers leaves him paralyzed. The morning fog clung to Riverside Park like a ghost refusing to leave. John Richardson's breath formed small clouds as his expensive running shoes pounded the frozen path. Then he heard it, a scream that would shatter his world forever. A 5-year-old girl was drowning in the icy lake, and what she whispered after he saved her would reveal a truth so dark it would consume everything he thought he knew. But nobody imagined what would come next. John Richardson adjusted his Rolex. As he stepped out of his penthouse elevator, the familiar weight of success settling on his shoulders like an expensive coat. At 42, he commanded a tech empire worth over $2 billion. Yet this December morning felt different, emptier somehow. The marble lobby of his Manhattan building gleamed under crystal chandeliers, but John barely noticed as he headed towards Central Park for his daily run. "Good morning, Mr. Richardson," his doorman called out, but John's mind was elsewhere. Haunted by dreams he couldn't shake, that the crisp winter air hit his face as he began his usual route through the park. Steam rose from his breath in rhythmic puffs, matching his steady pace. Other early runners nodded respectfully. Everyone in this part of the city knew John Richardson, the man who'd built Richardson Technologies from a garage startup into a global powerhouse. But today, something pulled him toward a different path. Instead of his usual circuit around the reservoir, John found himself heading toward the quieter section near Riverside Park. The bare trees created intricate shadows on the frost-covered ground, and the silence felt almost sacred. That's when he heard a sound that made his blood freeze colder than the December air. A desperate scream, high-pitched and terrified, cutting through the morning stillness like a knife. John's businessman instincts kicked in immediately as he sprinted toward the sound, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scene that greeted him defied belief. A small figure thrashed in the dark water of the partially frozen lake, tiny hands clawing desperately at chunks of broken ice. The child couldn't have been more than 5 years old, her blonde hair floating around her head like a halo as she fought against the frigid water that was already claiming her small body. "Help me," she cried, her voice barely audible above the sound of splashing water and crackling ice. Without thinking, John ripped off his jacket and dove into the lake. The shock of the icy water hit him like a physical blow, but he pushed through, his powerful strokes carrying him toward the drowning child. Years of competitive swimming in college served him well as he fought against the numbing cold that threatened to steal his strength. "I've got you," he gasped as his arms wrapped around the tiny, shivering form. "I've got you, sweetheart." The little girl's blue lips trembled as she clung to him with surprising strength. Her brown eyes, wide with terror and something else, something that looked almost like relief, stared into his face as he pulled them both toward the shore. Adrenaline coursed through John's veins as he lifted the child from the water, her small body feeling impossibly light in his arms. She was hypothermic, her skin pale and cold, but she was breathing. That's when she leaned close to his ear, her voice barely a whisper, and spoke words that would change everything he thought he knew about the world. "They pushed me," she breathed, her small hand clutching his shirt. "They pushed me, so I would die." John's world tilted on its axis. The successful businessman, the man who'd conquered boardrooms and built an empire, felt his knees almost buckle at those innocent words, spoken with such devastating clarity. "I'm going to save you," he whispered back, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't felt in years. "I promise you, I'm going to save you." But as he looked into those knowing brown eyes, John Richardson had no idea that this moment would unravel secrets buried so deep. They would threaten to destroy everything he'd built and everyone he'd ever trusted. Detective Maria Santos arrived at the scene 15 minutes after John's 911 call, her experienced eyes immediately taking in every detail. The paramedics were already wrapping the little girl in warming blankets, but John refused to leave her side. His expensive running gear still dripping lake water onto the ambulance floor. "Sir, I need to ask you some questions," Detective Santos said, her voice gentle but firm. She'd been with the NYPD for 12 years and had seen enough to know when something didn't add up. John's protective instincts flared. "Can't this wait? She needs medical attention." "The child is stable," Santos replied, pulling out her notepad. "But I need to understand what happened here. You said she told you someone pushed her." The little girl Luia, the paramedics had learned from her bracelet pressed closer to John, her small fingers still clutching his shirt. Her brown eyes darted nervously between the adults, and John noticed how she flinched whenever anyone else tried to approach. "Tell the detective what you told me, sweetheart," John encouraged softly. Olivia's voice was barely audible. "The mean man and lady said I was bad. They said if I went away, they'd get money." Her lower lip trembled. "They pushed me through the..." Ison walked away. Detective Santos exchanged a meaningful look with her partner. Cases involving children were always complex, but this had all the hallmarks of something much darker than a simple accident. "Olivia, can you tell us about these people? Do you live with them?" The child nodded, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "Foster parents. They said nobody wanted me anyway." John felt rage building in his chestnut, the calculated anger he used in business negotiations, but something primal and protective. "Where are these people now?" "That's what we're going to find out," Santos replied grimly. "Mr. Richardson, I'm going to need your contact information. You may be called as a witness." At the hospital, John paced the waiting room while doctors examined Olivia. He'd called his assistant to cancel all meetings for the day, something he'd never done in 20 years of business. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw those trusting brown eyes and heard that whispered confession. Dr. Jennifer Walsh emerged from the examination room with a troubled expression. "She's going to be fine physically, no permanent damage from the hypothermia," but she paused, choosing her words carefully. "There are signs of prolonged neglect and possible abuse. Old bruises, malnutrition indicators." "Where will she go now?" John asked, though he already dreaded the answer. "Child Services will place her temporarily until they investigate the foster family. Given what she's told us, there will definitely be criminal charges." John watched through the window as Olivia lay in the hospital bed, looking impossibly small against the white sheets. Something stirred in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since losing his own daughter Emma in a house fire 5 years ago. His marriage hadn't survived that tragedy, and he'd thrown himself into work to escape the pain. But looking at Olivia now, he felt something awakening that he'd thought was dead forever. "Doctor, what's the process for emergency foster placement?" he heard himself asking. Dr. Walsh raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Richardson, that's a significant commitment. The screening process alone takes months, and given the circumstances, I have resources." John interrupted. "The best lawyers, investigators, whatever it takes. That child saved my life today as much as I saved hers." As if sensing his presence, Olivia turned toward the window. When their eyes met, she smiled, the first real smile John had seen from her. In that moment, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. But he had no idea that across town, in a nondescript office building, two people were making frantic phone calls about a plan that had gone terribly wrong, and a little girl who was supposed to be dead. The emergency custody hearing took place. 3 days later, in a sterile courtroom that smelled of old wood and broken dreams, John sat beside his attorney, Marcus Webb, the best family lawyer money could buy, while across the aisle, state representatives argued against placing Olivia with an unmarried businessman who had no prior experience with children. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and silver hair, studied the case files with obvious concern. "Mr. Richardson, your financial qualifications are impressive, but emergency placement requires more than monetary resources." "Your Honor," Marcus interjected, "my client has already undergone accelerated background checks, home inspection, and psychological evaluation. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a child psychologist, has interviewed both Mr. Richardson and Olivia separately." Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, her report in hand. "Your Honor, in 30 years of practice, I've rarely seen such a strong bond form so quickly. Olivia specifically requested to stay with Mr. Richardson, and given the trauma she's experienced, maintaining that sense of safety is crucial." John watched Olivia from the gallery, where she sat with a court-appointed advocate. She wore a yellow dress that someone from Child Services had bought her, but her eyes remained fixed on him with unwavering trust. Judge Hendricks addressed him directly. "Mr. Richardson, this child has been through unimaginable trauma. Are you prepared for the challenges that come with caring for an abused child?" John stood, his voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Your Honor, 5 days ago I thought I knew what was important in life: success, profit margins, market share. But when I pulled Olivia from that lake, I remembered what actually matters. I lost my daughter Emma 5 years ago, and I thought that part of my heart was dead forever. But this little girl, She's brought something back to life in me that I didn't even know I was missing." The judge's expression softened slightly, and the criminal investigation detective Santos approached the bench. "Your Honor, we've arrested Robert and Diane Forster on charges of attempted murder and insurance fraud. They had a substantial life insurance policy on Olivia and believed her death would appear accidental. There's evidence suggesting this isn't their first attempt to harm children in their care." A collective gasp filled the courtroom. John felt his hands clench into fists as the full magnitude of evil became clear. Furthermore, Santos continued, "Our investigation has uncovered potential connections to a larger network. Mr. Richardson's protection may be exactly what this child needs while we build our case." Judge Hendricks was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces before her. Finally, she spoke. "Emergency custody is granted to Mr. Richardson for a period of 60 days, subject to review and regular home visits from Child Services. The child's safety remains paramount." As the gavel fell, John felt tears he hadn't shed in years threatening to spill. When he turned to Olivia, she was already running toward him, her small arms wrapping around his waist with fierce determination. "You really going to be my daddy?" she whispered against his chest. "If you want me to be," John replied, his voice thick with emotion. That evening, as they sat in John's penthouse overlooking the glittering city, Olivia curled up beside him on the leather sofa, finally looking like the child she was supposed to be. "Mr. John," she said quietly. "Just John is fine, sweetheart, or whatever feels right to you." "Daddy John," she decided with a smile. "Will you read me a story?" As John opened the children's book his assistant had hastily purchased, he noticed Olivia studying his face intently. "What is it, honey?" "You have kind eyes," she said simply. "Not like the mean people. Your eyes make me feel safe." John's heart swelled with a love he'd forgotten was possible. But later that night, as he tucked Olivia into the guest room he'd hastily converted into a child's bedroom, she grabbed his hand with sudden urgency. "Daddy John, the bad people, they knew things about me, things they shouldn't have known. They said I was worth more dead than alive." Her brown eyes filled with fear. "What if there are more bad people?" John knelt beside her bed, his businessman's mind already spinning with protective strategies and resources he could deploy. "No one will ever hurt you again, Olivia, I promise you that." But as he kissed her forehead and turned off the light, John couldn't shake the feeling that Detective Santos was right about a larger network. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a nagging voice whispered that this was far from over. 2 weeks into their new life together, John discovered that loving a traumatized child required more strength than building a billion-dollar empire. Olivia had nightmares that left her screaming until dawn, and certain sounds like ice clinking in glasses would send her into panic attacks that broke John's heart. Dr. Amanda Foster, Olivia's trauma therapist, met with them twice weekly in her warm office filled with stuffed animals and art supplies. Unlike her namesake who had tried to kill Olivia, this Dr. Foster radiated genuine compassion and expertise. "Healing isn't linear," she explained to John during one of their sessions. "Olivia is remarkably resilient, but trust takes time to rebuild when it's been so thoroughly shattered." John watched through the one-way mirror as Olivia played with dolls, her small hands gently arranging a family scene. The protective daddy doll always stood between the little girl doll and any perceived threats. "She's processing the trauma through play," Dr. Foster noted. "Notice how she always creates scenarios where the child is saved and protected. That's a healthy sign." At home, John was learning the rhythms of fatherhood. He'd never had the chance to fully experience with Emma. Olivia loved pancakes cut into star shapes, insisted on wearing her seatbelt even in the elevator, and had developed an endearing habit of holding his hand during any transition between rooms. "Daddy John," she said one evening as they worked on a puzzle together, "why did the bad people want me to die?" John set down his puzzle piece, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people make very bad choices because they want something they don't deserve. But that was never about you not being worthy of love. You are precious and valuable, and nothing will ever change that." Olivia nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Like how you're precious to me." "Exactly like that," John smiled, his heart swelling with love for this remarkable little girl. But their peaceful evening was interrupted by John's secure phone buzzing with an urgent message from Detective Santos. "Need to meet. New developments in the case. Urgent." They met the next morning at a discreet coffee shop in Midtown. Santos looked haggard, her usually sharp appearance softened by obvious exhaustion. "We've uncovered something big, John, and I mean really big." She slid a thick folder across the table. The foster couple was part of an organized network trafficking children through fraudulent adoption and foster care placements. John's blood chilled as he opened the folder. Inside were photos, documents, and a web of connections that made his head spin. "This operation spans multiple states," Santos continued. "They were placing children with families who would abuse them, exploit them, or in Olivia's case, murder them for insurance money. We're talking about hundreds of children over the past decade." "Jesus," John breathed, scanning the documents. "How is this possible? Corrupt caseworkers, falsified documents, and people in positions of authority who are bought off. The FBI is taking over the investigation." "But John," Santos leaned forward urgently, "we think they know Olivia survived. There have been inquiries about her whereabouts." John's protective instincts flared. "What kind of inquiries?" "Phone calls to the hospital, asking about her condition. Someone tried to access her child services file. We think they're trying to finish what they started." That afternoon, John quietly hired a private security team, former military professionals who specialized in personal protection. He didn't want to frighten Olivia, but her safety was non-negotiable. As he watched her play in their living room, building elaborate Lego castles with determined concentration, John felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. This innocent child had already endured more evil than most adults could imagine, and somehow she was still capable of laughter and trust. "Daddy, John, look," Olivia called out, proudly displaying her castle. "It has high walls so the princess is safe inside." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," John said, kneeling beside her. "Tell me about the princess." "She was very sad and scared, but then a brave king saved her and gave her a home where nobody could hurt her ever again." Olivia's brown eyes met his with perfect trust, and they lived happily ever after. John pulled her into a hug, silently, vowing that her fairy tale ending would come true. But as night fell over the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that their biggest challenges were still ahead. The network that had tried to kill Olivia was still out there, and they wouldn't give up easily. John Richardson had faced down corporate raiders, hostile takeovers, and ruthless competitors. But protecting this precious child would require every ounce of strength, cunning, and love he possessed. Christmas was 3 weeks away, and John threw himself into creating magical memories for Olivia with the same intensity he'd once applied. 2 quarterly earnings reports. The penthouse was transformed with twinkling lights, a 12-foot Fraser fir, and enough presents to stock a small toy store. "Daddy John, it's like living in a fairy tale," Olivia breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. As she decorated cookies in the kitchen, flour dusted her dark hair, and her smile was radiant with pure joy. But their happiness was shadowed by the constant presence of security. Jake Morrison, the head of John's protection detail, was a former Navy SEAL who'd seamlessly integrated into their daily routine. To Olivia, he was simply Mr. Jake, who accompanied them on outings and had taught her how to make paper airplanes. "Any updates from Detective Santos?" John asked Jake quietly while Olivia napped. 3 more arrests yesterday," Jake reported, "but the bigger fish are still swimming. Someone with serious money and connections is running this operation." John's jaw tightened. "What about the threats?" "Nothing direct, but there's been unusual activity around your building. Surveillance vans, people asking questions about your routines. We're handling it." That evening, as John tucked Olivia into bed, she surprised him with an unexpected question. "Daddy, John, will you tell me about your little girl, the one who went to heaven?" John's breath caught. They'd talked about Emma a few times, but Olivia had never asked for details. "Her name was Emma," John said softly, settling beside Olivia's bed. "She was 7 when she died, and she loved to draw pictures of butterflies. She would have loved you very much. Do you think she's happy that you're taking care of me now?" John felt tears threaten. "I think Emma is very happy that her daddy's heart learned to love again." Olivia reached out and touched John's cheek. "I think she sent me to you, so you wouldn't be sad anymore." The next morning brought devastating news. Detective Santos called with an update that made John's blood run cold. "We found the source of the leaks," she said grimly. "Someone in child services has been feeding information to the network. They know about Olivia's placement with you, your address, even details about her therapy sessions." John paced his office, his mind racing through security protocols. How is that possible? Money talks, John, but it gets worse. We intercepted communications suggesting they're planning something for Christmas Eve, something they're calling the final gift. They're coming after her. We think so. My recommendation is to relocate immediately, somewhere off the grid, until we can roll up the entire network. John looked out at the city skyline. His empire spread below him like a chessboard. Everything he'd built, everyone he employed, all of it suddenly seemed insignificant compared to protecting one little girl. I have a house in the Hamptons, he said. Private security, limited access points. That could work. When can you move? Today. Explaining the sudden trip to Olivia required careful balance between honesty and protection. John knelt beside her as she played with her new doll house, his heart heavy with the burden of adult fears she shouldn't have to carry. Sweetheart, how would you like to have an adventure? We're going to visit a special house by the ocean. Olivia looked up with immediate concern. Are the bad people coming back? John's heart broke at how quickly she'd learned to recognize danger. Mr. Jake and I are going to make sure you're always safe. But sometimes, adventures are fun too. As they packed hastily, Olivia insisted on bringing the photo of Emma that John kept on his nightstand. She should come too, she said simply. Families stay together. That afternoon, they drove out of Manhattan in a convoy of black SUVs, Olivia chattering excitedly about seeing the ocean while John watched the mirrors for any sign of pursuit. The Hamptons house was a fortress disguised as a beach. Cottage steel reinforced walls hidden behind weathered shingles, bulletproof windows that looked like ordinary glass, and enough security technology to protect a head of state. But to Olivia, it was simply a magical place where waves crashed against the shore, and seashells waited to be discovered. Asterisk, as she ran along the beach with Jake's careful supervision, John felt a moment of peace. That night, as wind howled off the Atlantic, John stood guard by Olivia's window, watching shadows move across the moonlit dunes. Somewhere out there, evil people were planning to destroy the innocent child sleeping peacefully behind him. They had no idea they were about to face John Richardson's unlimited resources, unshakable determination, and the fierce love of a father who had already lost one daughter and would die before losing another. The final confrontation was coming, and John was ready for war. Christmas Eve dawned grey and stormy over the Hamptons, matching John's mood as he reviewed security reports in his study. Jake had positioned 8 operatives around the property, and Detective Santos was coordinating with FBI agents who'd arrived the night before. "Daddy John, you look worried," Olivia observed, climbing onto his lap with her favorite stuffed elephant, a gift he'd bought during their first week together. "Just thinking about grown-up things, sweetheart," John said, wrapping his arms around her small frame. "Are you excited about Christmas tomorrow?" "The most excited ever," Olivia beamed. "But Daddy John, if the bad people come, will you still love me, even if I can't stay with you?" John's heart shattered at the question. This wise, wounded little girl was preparing herself for abandonment, even in the face of his unconditional love. "Olivia, look at me," he said firmly, tilting her chin up. "Nothing in this world could make me stop loving you. Nothing. You are my daughter now, and that means forever. Promise." "I promise, with my whole heart." Their moment was interrupted by Jake's urgent voice through the intercom. "John, we've got movement. Multiple vehicles approaching from the main road." John's protective instincts exploded into action. He carried Olivia to the reinforced safe room they'd prepared, her small hands clutching his shirt as the reality of danger set in. "Remember what we practiced," John said calmly, settling her with coloring books and emergency supplies. "Stay quiet, and Mr. Jake will come get you when it's safe." "Don't leave me," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm not going anywhere, baby girl. Daddy's going to make sure the bad people can never hurt you again." Through the security monitors, John watched as black SUVs surrounded the property. Men in tactical gear emerged, but something was wrong. They moved with military precision, not like criminals. Jake's voice crackled through the radio. "Stand down, FBI, they're ours." Agent Sarah Chen led the team, her expression grim as she briefed John in his living room. "We intercepted their communications. The network was planning to hit tonight, but we moved first. 18 arrests across 4 states, including the person at the top, who was running it," John demanded. Agent Chen hesitated. "Mr. Richardson, this is going to be difficult to hear." The head of the operation was someone close to the case, someone who had access to confidential information about Olivia's placement. John felt ice forming in his veins. Who? Dr. Amanda Foster, Olivia's therapist. The betrayal hit John like a physical blow. The woman who'd been helping Olivia heal, who'd earned their trust, who'd had access to their most vulnerable moments. She'd been orchestrating their destruction. She's been using her position to identify vulnerable children and feed information to the trafficking network. Chen continued. The therapy sessions were reconnaissance. She knew Olivia's schedule, her triggers, even details about your security arrangements. John sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the deception. How long? At least 5 years. Dozens of children. She was the inside connection that made the whole operation possible. The safe room door opened, and Olivia ran to John, somehow sensing his distress. "Daddy, John, why are you sad? Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," John said, pulling her cloth. "You did nothing wrong. You're perfect." Agent Chen knelt to Olivia's level. "Olivia, my name is Sarah, and I'm a police officer. I want you to know that all the bad people who tried to hurt you are going to jail forever. You're safe now, forever and ever." Olivia asked. "Forever and ever," Chen confirmed as the FBI team processed the scene and gathered evidence. John held Olivia on the couch, both of them wrapped in a soft blanket as they watched the storm rage outside. "Daddy John," Olivia said quietly, "I knew Dr. Foster was pretending to be nice. She asked too many questions about you and our house." John marveled at this child's intuition, her ability to sense danger even while healing from trauma. "Why didn't you tell me? I was scared you wouldn't believe me." "Grown-ups always believe other grown-ups. From now on, I will always believe you," John promised. "Your feelings and your voice matter more than anyone else's." As midnight approached, officially making it Christmas Day, John carried Olivia to her room. The immediate danger was over, but he knew the real journey was just beginning, helping this remarkable child fully heal and building the family they both deserved. "Daddy John," Olivia whispered as he tucked her in. "This is the best Christmas ever, because I get to keep you, and I get to keep you too, baby girl, for always." But as John kissed her forehead and watched her drift off to sleep, he knew their story was far from over. The network was dismantled, but trust would take time to rebuild. And somewhere in his heart, John sensed that the greatest revelations about this brave little girl were still to come. 3 months later, spring was painting New York with fresh hope, and Olivia had blossomed into a confident, joyful child who called John Daddy without hesitation. The adoption papers were finalized, making their bond legally unbreakable. But John sensed something deeper was still hidden beneath the surface of their story. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Olivia's new therapist, had helped tremendously with the healing process. Unlike the deceptive Dr. Foster, Rebecca was warm, genuine, and had no hidden agendas. During their latest session, she'd made an observation that haunted John's thoughts. "Olivia has remarkable resilience for a child who supposedly lived her entire life in the foster system," Rebecca had noted. "Her vocabulary, her instincts, even her mannerisms, suggest she had loving care during her early developmental years. John, I think there's more to her story than we know." That evening, as Olivia worked on homework at the kitchen island, John watched her with new eyes. She held her pencil the same way Emma used to. She organized her crayons by color just like Emma had. Small details he'd attributed to coincidence suddenly felt significant. "Daddy, I finished my math," Olivia announced proudly, sliding the worksheet toward him. "Beautiful work, sweetheart," John said, but his voice sounded distant even to his own ears. Olivia tilted her head, studying his face with those perceptive brown eyes. "You have your thinking face on. What are you thinking about?" John knelt beside her chair, choosing his words carefully. "Olivia, do you remember anything from when you were very little? Before the foster families?" Olivia's expression grew thoughtful. "Sometimes I have dreams about a lady with yellow hair who sang to me, and there was a big white house with roses." She paused, her small forehead wrinkling in concentration. "And there was a fire, a really big fire that made everything go away." John's heart stopped. Emma had died in a house fire. Their house had been white with rose bushes in the front yard, and his ex-wife Catherine had blonde hair. "What else do you remember about the lady with yellow hair?" John asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "She was sad all the time after the fire. She kept saying it was her fault, that she was a bad mummy." Olivia's voice dropped to a whisper. Then one day she took me on a long car ride and said I had to live with new people because she couldn't take care of me anymore. The pieces of an impossible puzzle began falling into place in John's mind. The timeline matched. Olivia was the right age, but how could Catherine have given away their daughter and told him she was dead? That night, after Olivia was asleep, John made a call he'd been avoiding for 5 years. "Hello, John." Catherine's voice was hollow, defeated. She'd struggled with alcoholism and depression since the fire, and John had lost touch with her completely after their bitter divorce. "Catherine, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." John's hands shook as he gripped the phone. "Is Emma alive?" The silence stretched so long John thought the call had dropped. "How did you find out?" Catherine whispered. Finally, John's legs gave out asterisk, and he sank into his chair. "Jesus Christ, Catherine, how could you do this to me?" To her, "The fire was my fault," Catherine sobbed. "I'd been drinking. I left a candle burning. When the firefighters said they couldn't find her body, I knew she must have gotten out somehow. But John, I was so ashamed, so broken. I couldn't face you knowing I'd almost killed our daughter. So you gave her away and let me believe she was dead. I found her wandering 3 blocks away, confused and scared. Instead of bringing her home, I made the worst decision of my life. I gave her to what I thought was a legitimate private adoption agency. They said they'd find her parents who could give her everything I couldn't." John felt rage and heartbreak warring in his chest. That agency was part of the trafficking network. "Catherine, our daughter has been abused, neglected, and nearly murdered because of your decision." "Oh God," Catherine wailed. "John, I've regretted it every single day. The guilt has been eating me alive. I've wanted to tell you so many times, but I was terrified you'd hate me even more." "I do hate you," John said coldly, "but Emma is safe now. She's with me, where she belongs, even though she doesn't remember being Emma. Can I see her?" "Absolutely not. You lost that right when you chose to let me grieve a living child for 5 years." John ended the call and sat in the darkness of his study, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd learned. The little girl sleeping peacefully down the hall wasn't just someone he'd chosen to love. She was his biological daughter, the child he'd mourned and missed every day since the fire. The next morning, Olivia found him making pancakes, her favorite breakfast. She climbed onto her usual stool and watched him with those knowing eyes. "Daddy, did you find out something important last night?" John turned to face her, seeing Emma's nose, Emma's determined chin, features he'd been too heartbroken to recognize before. "Olivia, how would you feel if I told you that you weren't just my daughter because I adopted you, but because you've always been my daughter?" Olivia considered this seriously. "You mean like how some kids have the same eyes as their daddies?" "Exactly, like that. Would that change anything?" John knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his. "It would change everything and nothing at all. You'd still be the brave, beautiful girl I love more than life itself. But it would mean we found each other again after being apart for a long time, like in the fairy tales where families get put back together. Just like that." Olivia smiled and threw her arms around his neck. "I knew you felt like my real daddy from the very beginning. Now I know why." As John held his daughter, his Emma, his Olivia, he marveled at the mysterious ways life could heal the deepest wounds. But he also knew that Catherine's revelation raised new questions about the trafficking network and how they'd targeted Emma specifically. Dr. Rebecca Martinez listened intently as John explained the stunning revelation about Olivia's true identity. They sat in her office while Olivia played in the adjoining room, building elaborate structures with wooden blocks and chattering happily to her stuffed elephant. "This explains so much about her attachment to you and her remarkable resilience," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "Children have cellular memory of love, even when trauma blocks conscious recollection. Emma knew she was safe with you because her heart remembered." "But what do I do about Catherine?" John asked, watching his daughter through the observation window. "She's Emma's biological mother, but she abandoned her and let me believe our child was dead. That's ultimately a decision for you and Emma to make together. When she's old enough to understand the full complexity of the situation," Rebecca advised. "For now, focus on her continued healing and the family bond you've rebuilt." That afternoon, John made another difficult call, this time to Agent Sarah Chen, who'd become a trusted ally in their ongoing journey toward justice. "Sarah, I need to share some information that might be relevant to your investigation," John began. then laid out the truth about Emma's identity and Catherine's role in her disappearance. Jesus, John, Chen breathed. This means the trafficking network didn't randomly target Emma through the foster system. They specifically placed her with abusive families. Knowing she came from wealth and influence, what are you saying? I'm saying this was personal. Someone wanted to hurt you specifically by destroying your daughter. The insurance scam with the Fosters was just the final phase of a long-term plan to make Emma disappear forever. John felt ice in his veins. Who would want to hurt me that badly? That's what we need to figure out. John, I want you to think about your business dealings. Anyone you might have crossed or defeated. Someone with serious resources and connections orchestrated this entire operation. That evening, John sat in his study reviewing 5 years of business records, searching for enemies who might have sought such elaborate revenge. As CEO of Richardson Technologies, he'd made tough decisions that had cost competitors millions. But murder seemed beyond the pale of corporate warfare. Emma He was still adjusting to thinking of her. By both names knocked on his study door. Around 9 o'clock, dressed in her favorite pajamas with dancing unicorns. "Daddy, you missed story time," she said, climbing onto his lap without invitation. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Daddy's trying to solve a puzzle." Emma studied the papers scattered across his desk with impressive focus for a 6-year-old. "Is it about the bad people who tried to hurt me? Something like that. Can I help? I'm good at puzzles." John smiled, despite his worry. "What would you do if you were trying to find someone who wanted to hurt our family?" Emma thought seriously about this question. "I would look for someone who is angry about something that happened before, like when kids at school are mean because they're upset about their parents getting divorced." The innocence of her analysis struck John like lightning. Someone angry about something that happened before. His mind raced through old deals, failed partnerships, corporate battles that had ended badly. Then he remembered Marcus Webb, his own attorney, mentioning something months ago about his ex-legal representation. "Emma, you're brilliant," John said, kissing the top of her head. "Go brush your teeth, and I'll be there in 5 minutes for extra story time." As Emma skipped away, John pulled out his phone and called Marcus. "John, it's pretty late for a business call," Marcus answered. "Marcus, when Catherine and I divorced 5 years ago, who represented her?" "That's an odd question. Why do you need to know? Just answer me, please." "It was James Morrison from Morrison, Klein and Associates. Nasty piece of work, actually. He tried to go after half your company assets until we proved Catherine's drinking contributed to Emma's death." John's blood ran cold. Morrison, Jake Morrison, his head of security, had the same last name. "Marcus, is James Morrison related to anyone in private security?" "Actually, yes. He has a brother in that field. Former military, I think." "John, what's this about?" John's mind raced through the implications. Jake had been with them from the beginning. Jake had access to all their security arrangements, their schedules, their safehouse locations. Jake had been perfectly positioned to feed information to the trafficking network. "Marcus, I need you to run a complete background check on Jake Morrison tonight." "John, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I think our security chief has been working for the other side." As John hung up, he realized Emma was still in the bathroom brushing her teeth, completely vulnerable and trusting. The man he'd hired to protect her might be the very person orchestrating her destruction. Moving quietly, John walked to the bathroom where Emma was singing softly to herself while brushing her teeth. She smiled at him in the mirror, toothpaste, foam around her lips, ready for stories. "Daddy, almost sweetheart, let's go to my bedroom tonight for stories. I want to show you the stars from my big window." John needed to keep Emma close while he figured out how deep Jake's betrayal went and whether they were in immediate danger. As they settled into his king-size bed with a pile of picture books, John's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Background complete. Jake Morrison is James Morrison's younger brother. Discharged from Navy SEALs under suspicious circumstances. Multiple financial connections to shell companies linked to trafficking network. John, get out now." As Emma read aloud about brave princesses and magical kingdoms, John quietly activated the silent alarm that would summon legitimate law enforcement. But he knew Jake would be monitoring all their communications. They were trapped in their own home with the enemy, and John had to find a way to protect his daughter without alerting Jake to his discovery. The final confrontation was closer than he'd imagined, and this time there would be nowhere left to run. John's training in corporate crisis management had taught him to remain calm under pressure, but nothing had prepared him for the deadly game of chess he was now playing with Emma's life as the stakes. As she fell asleep beside him, clutching her stuffed elephant, John carefully reviewed their options. Jake's room was down the hall, and John could hear him moving around, probably monitoring security feeds and communications. The other guards Jake had hired were unknowns. John had no way of knowing which ones were legitimate and which were part of the conspiracy. Moving with careful precision, John lifted Emma gently and carried her to his walk-in closet, which had a reinforced panic room hidden behind a false wall, a security feature Jake didn't know about because it had been installed years before Emma came into his life. "Daddy," Emma mumbled sleepily as he settled her on the small cot inside the hidden space. "We're playing a special hiding game, sweetheart," John whispered. "Stay very quiet until I come back, okay? Is it because of the bad people? I'm going to make sure there are no more bad people, ever," John promised, activating the room's independent communication system. Back in his bedroom, John used the secure line to contact Agent Chen directly. "Sarah, Jake Morrison is compromised. He's James Morrison's brother, and I think he's been feeding information to the network all along." "Jesus, John, where are you now?" "In my penthouse, but Jake doesn't know I've figured it out yet. Emma's secure, but I need backup immediately. We're 20 minutes out. Can you maintain the pretense until then?" "I'll have to." John ended the call and walked calmly to his study, acting as if he was continuing to review business documents. Within minutes, Jake appeared in the doorway, his demeanor subtly different now that John knew to look for deception. "Working late again?" Jake asked, his eyes scanning the room more carefully than usual. "Just catching up on some paperwork," John replied casually. "How are the security checks looking tonight?" "All quiet. Emma's asleep, out like a light." John forced himself to meet Jake's eyes normally. "Jake, I've been thinking about upgrading our security systems. Do you have any recommendations?" Jake stepped further into the room, and John noticed how he positioned himself between John and the door, a detail that would have seemed protective before but now felt threatening. "What kind of upgrades?" Jake asked. "Maybe something more comprehensive. I keep thinking about how Dr. Forster was able to access so much information about our routines." Jake's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Sometimes the biggest threats come from the people you trust most." The words hung in the air like a challenge. John realized that Jake knew he'd been discovered, and the pretense was over. "You're right about that," John said quietly. "I trusted you to protect my daughter, and you've been planning to kill her all along." Jake's hand moved toward his concealed weapon, but John had spent months learning from the man and anticipated the motion. He dove behind his desk as Jake drew his gun, using the heavy mahogany as cover. "Nothing personal, John," Jake called out. "But you cost my brother his law practice and his reputation. He wanted you to suffer the way he did, losing everything piece by piece. So you orchestrated Emma's kidnapping and placement in the trafficking network." "We orchestrated Emma's death," Jake corrected coldly. "The plan was for her to die in that fire 5 years ago, but your drunk ex-wife screwed it up by getting her out. When we found out she was alive, we had to get creative." John felt rage unlike anything he'd ever experienced. This monster had been in his home, around his daughter, planning her murder for months while pretending to protect her. "The Fosters were supposed to finish the job," Jake continued, moving closer to the desk. "But you had to play hero and save her. Then we decided to use you, let you get attached before we took her away permanently. Dr. Foster was working for you, among others. You'd be amazed how many people have prices when it comes to hurting children." John heard sirens in the distance, Agent Chen's backup arriving, but he also heard something else, Emma's small voice calling for him from the panic room's intercom. "Daddy, I hear loud voices. Are you okay?" Jake's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes widening as he realized Emma wasn't in her bedroom as he'd assumed. "Where is she?" Jake demanded, swinging his weapon toward the intercom system. "Somewhere you'll never find her," John said, rising from behind the desk as he heard boots thundering up the stairwell. The penthouse door exploded inward as FBI agents flooded in, their tactical lights illuminating the standoff in John's study. Jake spun toward the new threat, giving John the split second he needed to tackle the man who'd betrayed them. They crashed into the bookshelf, both men fighting desperately. Jake was trained and dangerous, but John fought with the fury of a father. protecting his child. As they struggled for control of the weapon, a single shot rang out. John felt burning pain in his shoulder but kept fighting until Agent Chen and her team subdued Jake with overwhelming force. "Daddy," Emma's voice crackled through the intercom, terrified and desperate. "I'm here, baby girl," John called out, pressing his hand against his bleeding shoulder. "The bad people are all gone now, forever." As paramedics treated John's wound and agents arrested Jake, Emma emerged from the panic room and ran to her father with fierce determination. "Did you win?" she asked, studying his face intently. "We won," John confirmed, pulling her close with his good arm. "We won everything." But as Agent Chen debriefed him on the full scope of the conspiracy, John realized their victory was more complete than he'd dared hope. Jake's capture had led to the final unraveling of the entire network, freeing dozens of other children and bringing justice to families who'd been destroyed by the Morrison brothers' greed and cruelty. 6 months later, John stood in the Butterfly Garden at Central Park, watching Emma chase monarchs with the pure joy of a child who finally understood she was completely safe. His shoulder had healed perfectly, but the deeper wounds of betrayal and fear had taken longer to mend. "She's remarkable," Dr. Rebecca Martinez said, joining John on the bench where he'd been observing Emma's play. 6 months ago, she was a traumatized child, afraid of her own shadow. Now look at her. Emma had indeed transformed into a confident, vibrant 8-year-old who approached life with curiosity rather than fear. She'd started 2nd grade at an exclusive private school, made friends easily, and shown remarkable resilience in processing the complex truth about her identity and past. "The other day she asked me if she should feel bad for the people who tried to hurt her," John shared. "I told her that forgiveness is a gift she gives herself, not something she owes anyone else." Wise advice. How are you processing everything? John considered the question carefully. "I'm angry that we lost those 5 years together, but grateful every day that we found each other again. Emma doesn't remember being Emma, and I've decided that's probably a blessing. Olivia is who she became through surviving all that trauma, and I love every part of who she is. And Catherine," John's expression hardened slightly. "She's in rehab, getting help for her alcoholism and depression. Emma knows she has a birth mother who made terrible choices, but also that families come in many forms. Maybe someday, when Emma's older, she'll decide if she wants a relationship with Catherine. That will be her choice to make." Agent Chen approached them across the garden, her professional demeanor softened by genuine warmth. Over the months since Jake's arrest, she'd become almost like family to John and Emma. "How's our girl doing?" Chen asked, watching Emma show her butterfly photos to other children in the garden. "Thriving," John replied. "What's the latest on the trials?" "James Morrison was sentenced to life in prison yesterday. Jake won't see the outside world again either. The entire network has been dismantled, and we've placed over 60 children in safe, loving homes." John felt deep satisfaction at the justice finally served. "And Dr. Foster, 25 years, she'll be eligible for parole when she's 78. Emma ran over to them, breathless with excitement, and holding a detailed drawing she'd made of a butterfly. "Daddy, look, I drew this one from memory." "Mrs. Chen, do you think the other kids would like butterfly drawings?" "I think they'd love them," Chen replied warmly. "You have a very special gift for bringing beauty into the world." That evening, as John tucked Emma into bed in the bedroom they'd redecorated together with butterflies and rainbows, she surprised him with a profound question. "Daddy, do you think everything that happened to me was meant to happen so we could find each other again?" John chose his words carefully. "I think terrible things happened to you that never should have happened to any child. But I also think love is stronger than evil, and somehow, love found a way to bring us back together, like in the fairy tales. Better than fairy tales, because this is real." Emma smiled and closed her eyes, then opened them again with sudden concern. "Daddy, what if I have bad dreams about the lake again?" "Remember what we practiced," John said gently. "If you have a scary dream, you picture me diving into that water to save you. And then you picture all the beautiful things that came after. Our pancake breakfasts, our trips to the park, all the ways we take care of each other. And if I'm still scared, then you call for me, and I'll be here in 10 seconds, always." As Emma drifted off to sleep, John sat in the chair beside her bed, as he had every night since bringing her home. This ritual of watching over her sleep had become sacred to him, a way of making up for all the nights he hadn't been there to protect her. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Webb, the Emma Richardson Foundation received another major donation today. You're going to change a lot of lives with this work. John smiled, thinking about the foundation he'd established in Emma's honor to support children who'd survived trafficking and abuse. Emma had insisted on being involved in choosing which organizations to fund, showing wisdom far beyond her years in understanding how their resources could help other families heal. Through the window, moonlight illuminated the city where their story had begun, with a desperate rescue from a frozen lake. Now, instead of fighting for survival, they were building a life filled with love, purpose, and the unshakable bond between a father and daughter who'd found each other against impossible odds. But John knew their story wasn't really about the darkness they'd escaped. It was about the light they'd created together, and the family they'd chosen to become, despite everything that had tried to tear them apart. As he finally headed to his own room, John paused at Emma's doorway for one last look at his sleeping daughter. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new opportunities to love and protect and nurture the remarkable person she was becoming. And for the first time in years, John Richardson slept peacefully, knowing that all the most important battles had been won. 1 year after the lake rescue, John organized a celebration that was part birthday party, part Thanksgiving, and part memorial for the family they'd rebuilt from ashes. The penthouse was filled with Emma's school friends, but also with Detective Santos, Agent Chen, Dr. Martinez, and other adults who'd become their extended family. Emma, now 8 years old and radiant with confidence, moved through the party like a natural hostess, making sure everyone felt included and loved. She'd grown 3 inches and gained 20 pounds of healthy weight, transforming from the malnourished child John had pulled from the lake into a vibrant girl who seemed to glow from within. "Make a speech, Daddy," Emma called out as the cake was brought in, a masterpiece decorated with butterflies and a fondant figure of a man saving a child from water. John stood, looking around at the faces of people who'd helped them heal and thrive. "A year ago, I thought I knew what was important in life: success, achievement, building something that would last. But Emma taught me that the only thing that really lasts is love." He found Emma's eyes across the room. "Sweetheart, you saved me just as much as I saved you. You taught me that being a daddy isn't about biology or perfect circumstances. It's about showing up every day and choosing love over fear." Emma climbed onto her chair and raised her juice cup. And I want to say thank you to everyone who helped us become a real family, especially Mrs. Chen, who caught all the bad people, and Dr. Martinez, who helped me not be scared anymore. As the party continued, John noticed Emma in deep conversation with Detective Santos, their heads bent together over something Emma was drawing. "What are you two plotting?" John asked, joining them. "Emma's been asking about the foundation and whether there are other kids who might need help," Santos explained. "She has some very mature ideas about how to reach children who are still trapped." Emma held up her drawing, a detailed illustration of children holding hands in a circle around a bright light. "Daddy, what if we made a special place where kids who've been hurt could come and learn to be happy again? Like a really big house where they could stay until they find their forever families." John's heart swelled with pride at his daughter's compassion. "That's a beautiful idea, sweetheart. What would you call this special place?" "Butterfly House," Emma said, without hesitation. "Because butterflies start out as caterpillars all wrapped up and scared, but then they turn into something beautiful that can fly." Agent Chen overheard and approached with obvious interest. "Emma, that's actually a brilliant concept. There's a real need for specialized residential facilities for trafficking survivors." Over the following weeks, John threw himself into planning Butterfly House with the same intensity he'd once applied to corporate acquisitions, but this time Emma was his co-founder and chief advisor, insisting on details like art therapy rooms, a greenhouse for growing flowers, and a special library with books about brave children. "Every kid should have a room that's just theirs," Emma explained to the architects, "with a lock on the inside so they know they're safe, and windows so they can see the sky." The groundbreaking ceremony took place 6 months later on a beautiful spring day. Emma, wearing a yellow dress covered in butterflies, held the golden shovel alongside John as they broke ground on what would become a revolutionary facility for healing traumatized children. "This is for all the kids who are still waiting to be saved," Emma announced to the gathered crowd, her voice clear and strong. "And for all the daddies and mummies who are looking for their children." That evening, As they sat in their living room reviewing architectural plans and Emma's detailed suggestions for programming, she looked up from her drawings with serious eyes. "Daddy, can I ask you something important? Always. Do you think my first mummy Catherine would be proud of what we're doing?" John considered his answer carefully. They'd talked about Catherine many times, and Emma understood the complexity of having a birth mother who'd made terrible choices while still being loved by someone who'd become her real father. "I think anyone who truly loves you would be proud of the person you're becoming," John said finally. "But Emma, what matters most is that you're proud of yourself." "I am proud," Emma said with quiet confidence. "I'm proud that something good is coming from all the bad things that happened. Like how butterflies are more beautiful because they had to struggle to get out of their cocoons." As John tucked Emma into bed that night, she made a request that surprised him. "Daddy, will you tell me the story about the day you saved me from the lake? The whole story, like a fairy tale." John settled beside her bed, as he had every night. For over a year, once upon a time, there was a businessman who thought he had everything he needed. But his heart was empty because he'd lost his little princess in a terrible fire. As he told their story, their real story, Emma listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking him to repeat favorite parts or add details she remembered. When he reached the part about pulling her from the lake, she always smiled. "And that's when I knew you were my real daddy," she would say. "Even before we both knew it was true." "How did you know?" John always asked. "Because you jumped in the water without thinking about yourself. That's what real daddies do." As Emma drifted off to sleep, John reflected on the miraculous journey that had brought them to this moment. From the darkest tragedy had come the greatest blessing of his life. From a little girl's whispered words of terror had grown a love strong enough to move mountains. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they worked to help other families heal and find each other. But tonight, John Richardson sat beside his daughter's bed, watching her sleep peacefully, and knew that every battle had been worth fighting for this moment of perfect contentment. 2 years after that frozen December morning that changed everything, John stood on the stage of the Grand Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, looking out at an audience of philanthropists, child welfare advocates, and families whose lives had been transformed by the Butterfly House Foundation. Emma, now 9 years old, and poised beyond her years, sat in the front row wearing a sophisticated navy dress with naturally butterfly accessories. She caught his eye and gave him an encouraging smile and thumbs up. "Ladies and gentlemen," John began, 2 years ago, I thought I was successful. I had money, power, and influence. But I was actually a broken man living half a life, haunted by loss and afraid to truly love again." He found Emma's face in the crowd. "Then, a little girl taught me that real success isn't measured in profits or market share. It's measured in lives saved, hearts healed, and families made whole." The audience erupted in applause as Emma joined him on stage, carrying a thick folder of documents. "These are letters," Emma announced into the microphone, her clear voice carrying throughout the ballroom. "From kids who lived at Butterfly House and found their forever families, and from parents who adopted children they might never have met without our program." She opened the folder and selected a letter at random. "This one is from a boy named Miguel, who's 10 years old. He writes, 'Dear Emma and Mr. John, thank you for making Butterfly House where I could learn to trust again. My new mum and dad say I'm brave like a butterfly, and I think you're brave too.'" There wasn't a dry eye in the ballroom as Emma continued reading excerpts from dozens of letters, testimonials to healing, hope, and the power of love to overcome even the darkest evil. "But the most important thing," Emma concluded, "isn't what we built, it's what we learned. We learned that families aren't just about blood, they're about people who choose to love each other no matter what." As the evening concluded and guests mingled over dessert, John found himself in conversation with Detective Santos, who'd become like family over the past 2 years. "You know what amazes me most about Emma," Santos said, watching the girl move gracefully through the crowd, making every adult feel heard and valued. "She has every reason to be angry, bitter, or afraid. Instead, she's become this force of healing and hope." "She's remarkable," John agreed. "Sometimes I think she was meant to go through all of that so she could help other children in ways that only someone who survived it could understand." Agent Chen joined them, her usual professional demeanor softened by genuine emotion. "John, I have some news I thought you'd want to hear in person." "Good news or bad news?" "The best news. We just closed the books on the last case connected to the trafficking network. Every child has been found and placed in safe homes. Every perpetrator has been prosecuted. It's completely over." John felt a weight he'd carried for 2 years finally lift from his shoulders. All of them. Every single child. All of them. 47 children total, ranging in age from 3 to 16. And it's largely because Emma's story gave other victims the courage to come forward and help us connect the dots. Across the room, Emma was deep in conversation with a teenage girl, Syrah 16, who'd been one of the network's victims and was now thriving in her adoptive family. Emma asked if she could mentor some of the older kids. Santos noted, "She wants to show them that survival isn't just about escaping, it's about building something beautiful from the pieces." That night, as John and Emma rode home in their car through the glittering streets of Manhattan, Emma was unusually quiet. "Penny, for your thoughts?" John asked. "I was thinking about that day at the lake," Emma said thoughtfully. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been running that morning?" "Every day," John admitted, "but I've learned not to focus on the what-ifs. We found each other, and that's what matters." "I think it was meant to happen," Emma said with quiet certainty. "Not the bad parts. Those were just people making terrible choices, but us finding each other again. That was bigger than coincidence." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe sometimes the universe breaks things apart so it can put them back together, even stronger than before." As they entered their penthouse, their home, their sanctuary, their launching pad for changing the world, Mia paused at the framed photo on the entrance table. It showed the moment John had pulled her from the lake, captured by a bystander's phone and later given to them by Detective Santos. "We should put this in the Butterfly House lobby," Emma suggested, "with a sign that says every ending can become a beginning." "Perfect," John agreed, pulling his daughter into a hug that felt like coming home every single time. Later that night, as John performed the bedtime ritual that had become sacred over the past 2 years, Emma made a request that surprised him. "Daddy, I want to write a book about what happened to us. Not scary parts for little kids, but a story about how love wins even when everything seems hopeless." "That's a wonderful idea. What would you call it?" Emma smiled with the wisdom of a child who'd seen darkness and chosen light. "I'd call it The Day Daddy Jumped in the Water. Because that's when everything changed, when someone loved me enough to jump in without thinking about the danger." John felt tears threaten as he kissed his daughter's forehead. "And I'd do it again every single day for the rest of my life." "I know," Emma whispered, already drifting towards sleep. "That's what makes you my real daddy." As John turned off the lights and headed toward his own room, he paused at the window overlooking Central Park. Somewhere out there, the lake where he'd found Emma reflected the city lights like scattered diamonds. What had begun as the worst day of their lives had become the foundation for the best years. The Butterfly House now sheltered 12 children on their journey toward healing and forever families. The foundation had expanded to 3 states, and Emma's mentorship program was being studied by child welfare agencies across the country. But more than any program or building, their story had become a beacon of hope for families torn apart by tragedy and evil. John Richardson had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or market dominance, it was measured in love, given freely, children saved, and the courage to jump into icy water when someone you love is drowning. That as he settled into bed, John's last thought was of Emma's words. Every ending can become a beginning. Their ending had become the beginning of something beautiful, a father and daughter who'd found each other twice, a love that had conquered impossible odds, and a legacy that would heal families for generations to come. In the quiet of the Manhattan night, John Richardson slept peacefully, knowing that the most important victories in life weren't won in boardrooms or bank accounts, they were won in moments of pure love, when someone chooses to jump into the darkness to save another soul. And every morning for the rest of his life, he would wake up grateful for the frozen December day when a little girl's whispered words had led him home to his heart. The end.